Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today we will talk about a famous Russian writer, Mikhail Bulgakov. Mikhail Bulgakov, 1891-1940. Full name, Mikhail Afanasyevich Bulgakov. Birth in 1891 in Kiev, then part of the Russian Empire. Now it is part of Ukraine. His father, Afanasy Bulgakov, was a professor at the Kiev Theological Academy and a prominent figure in Russian Orthodoxy. His mother, Varvara Mikhailovna, was well educated and fostered a love for literature in her children. Mikhail was the eldest of 7 children, many of whom went on to become academics or professionals. Mikhail graduated from the Faculty of Medicine at Kiev University in 1916. He served as a military doctor during World War I and later in the Russian Civil War, experiencing the trauma and the disillusionment of both fronts. His medical career was marked by harsh rural conditions which inspired many short stories and essays. For example, A Country Doctor's Notebook. He abandoned medicine in 1920 to pursue a full-time literary career. He began writing satirical sketches for newspapers in Vladikavkaz and later in Moscow. He moved to Moscow in 1921, becoming a writer and editor at various journals. His early stories were influenced by Gogol, Dostoevsky, and a European modernist, blending the grotesque and the philosophical. Now let's analyze his philosophical and thematic concerns. Satire and political critique. Criticized the Soviet bourgeois totalitarianism and blind ideological zeal. Metaphysical duality. His fiction explored the struggle between good and evil, often portrayed through supernatural or mythic frameworks. Religious undertones. While not overtly religious, he used biblical allusions and moral parables. For example, Pontius Pilate dilemma in the work The Master and Marguerite. Existential irony. His characters often face absurd circumstances where truth is elusive and morality is corrupted. Freedom and artistic integrity. A major recurring concern is the suppression of creativity and the soul's yearning for expression under authoritarian regimes. Major works and their context. First one, The Master and Marguerite, written in between 1928 and 1940. Is a novel within a novel, combining satire, romance, theology, and fantasy. Set in a 1930s Moscow, it critiques Stalinist repression while exploring the eternal struggle for good and evil. Characters include Volant, that is Satan, the Master, that is a suppressed writer, and Margaret, his devoted lover, and a Pontius Pilate. Was unpublished during his lifetime due to its anti-authoritarian subtext. The next work, The White Guard, 1925, a semi-autobiographical novel about the Turbin family during the chaos of the Russian Civil War. repaints a nuanced picture of the White Russians and criticized the Bolshevik extremism, adapted into a successful play that is The Days of the Turbines, famously admired by Stalin. The next work, Heart of a Dog, 1925, a satirical novella about a stray dog turned into a vulgar man through scientific experimentation. It parodies Soviet attempts to reshape humanity and society through unnatural means. Banned in USSR until the 1980s. Now the next work, The Fatal Eggs, 1925. A dystopian science fiction tale about a biologist whose experiment leads to catastrophic consequences, offers commentary on the dangers of unchecked power, scientific hubris, and ideological fanaticism. The next work, Black Snow, a theatrical novel, unfinished. A savage satire on the Soviet literary bourgeoisie and censorship based on his own experiences with the Moscow Art Theatre, portrays the crushing of creative spirit by institutional absurdity. The next work, A Country's Doctor's Notebook, 1925 to 1927, a collection of short stories drawn from his medical service in rural Russia, reveals the isolation, fear, and ethical challenges faced by a young doctor. Now Mikhail Bulgakov's theatre entered relationship with a Soviet power. He joined the Moscow Art Theatre in 1920s and developed a strong theatrical skills. Wrote several plays including The Days of the Turbines, Zoika's Apartment, Molière, also known as The Cabal of Hypocrisies, Don Quixote, Unfinished Work, etc. He was constantly clashed with his censors. Many works were banned or heavily edited. Stalin saw the work The Days of the Turbines multiple times and reportedly ensured Bulgakov's survival despite the political tensions. Censorship and surveillance. Most of Mikhail Bulgakov's works were edited, banned, or unpublished during his lifetime. He was under constant surveillance by the NKVD, that is Soviet secret police. He wrote a famous letter to Stalin in 1930 asking either for freedom to work or permission to emigrate. Stalin called him personally, but only offered a minor theatre works. Struggles and final years. Mikhail Bulgakov suffered from hereditary nephrosclerosis, the same disease that killed his father. He became increasingly ill while writing the work The Master and Marguerite, dictating the final sections to his wife Yelena Shilovskaya. He died in 1940, unpublished, impoverished, and embittered. Posthumous fame and legacy. The Master and Marguerite was first published in a censored form in 1966 and 67 in a Russian magazine, that is Moskva, creating a literary sensation. The full uncensored version was not published in the Soviet Union until 1973. Today, his works are celebrated worldwide and have been translated into dozens of languages. Influenced countless writers including Salman Rushdie, Neil Gaiman, and Haruki Murakami. Adapted into films, operas, graphic novels, and stage productions globally. Bulgakov in the academic world. He is subject of numerous scholarly books and dissertations in literature, theatre, political science, and philosophy. Considered a pioneer of magic realism alongside Latin American writers. His critique of censorship, ideology, and metaphysical anxiety are widely studied in post-totalitarian contexts. Now let's analyze the main works of Mikhail Bulgakov. The Master and Marguerite, 1967, posthumously published. Set in 1930s Moscow, this satirical novel juxtaposes a visit by Satan, that is Volant, with a parallel narrative about Pontius Pilate and Yeshua, that is Jesus. The Master, a censored writer, and Margarita, his devoted lover, anchor a narrative about love, loss, and artistic truth. It critiques Soviet atheism, censorship, and the moral consequences of ideological oppression. The next work, The White Guard, 1925, serialized, 1966. Full posthumous edition. This novel follows the Turpin family during the chaotic Russian Civil War in Kiev. Drawing from Bulgakov's own background, it provides a sympathetic portrayal of white officers amid the collapse of the Russian Empire. It explores themes of loyalty, identity, and the personal toll of revolution. The next work, Heart of a Dog, written in 1925, published in 1987. In this science fiction satire, a stray dog named Sharik is transformed into a grotesque human named Shariku by Professor Pribansky. The novel critiques the Soviet experiment and the dangers of trying to forcibly remake nature and society. It remains a powerful allegory on degeneration and the dehumanizing aspects of totalitarianism. The next work, The Fatal X, 1925, a speculative novel about a Professor Pereskov's discovery of a red ray that accelerates life, which leads to chaos when a government misuses it. The resulting biological disaster critiques blind trust in science and a bureaucratic incompetence. It reflects on the unintended consequences of progress and the state overreach. The next work, A Country Doctor's Notebook, written in 1925 to 27, published posthumously 1963 and 1964. This collection of short stories is based on Bulgakov's experiences as a young doctor in a rural Russia. It realistically portrays the emotional and ethical challenges of medicine in isolation. The tone is both introspective and compassionate, revealing his philosophical engagement with suffering and duty. The next work, Black Snow, a theatrical novel written during 1936 and 37, published posthumously in 1967. A semi-autobiographical novel about a writer's satirical and tragic attempt to stage a play in the Soviet theatre system. It critiques censorship, absurd bureaucracy, and the degradation of artistic freedom. The character Sergei Maksudov serves as a proxy for Bulgakov himself. The next work, The Days of the Turpins, 1926. A stage adaptation of the The White Guard, focusing on the same aristocratic family caught in civil war. Despite its controversial subject, the play was praised by Stalin and ran successfully. It explores the themes of loss, idealism, and historical disillusionment with a great psychological depth. The next work, Soika's Apartment, 1926. Set in NEP-era Moscow, this play follows Zoya, a woman who runs a fashion salon cum brothel to escape poverty. The play satirizes the era's moral decline, black market enterprise, and a social hypocrisy. It blends farce with a biting political commentary. The next work, The Cabal of Hippocrates, Molière, written 1930s or 1936, published 1962. This play dramatizes the life of Molière and his persecution by the French monarchy, mirroring Bulgakov's own struggles with the Soviet censorship. It emphasizes the power of art in confronting tyranny and religious hypocrisy, a profound reflection on the clash between artists and authoritarian regimes. The next work, Ivan Vassilevich, written during 1935 and 36, published 1965. In this time travel comedy, a Soviet engineer swaps places with Tsar Ivan the Terrible. The farce critiques authoritarian continuity and the absurdity of totalitarian rule. It playfully juxtaposes past and present to reveal the cyclical nature of power. The next work, Adam and Eve, 1931, published 1971. A dystopian play in which a small group of survivors rebuild their civilization after a chemical apocalypse. The characters must re-evaluate morality and humanity outside the context of ideology. Themes include renewal, conscience, and the critique of blind faith in political systems. The next work, The Crimson Island, 1928. This one-act play parodies both colonialism and Soviet revolutionary propaganda set on a fictional South Sea island. It targets ideological dogmatism and double standards in both capitalist and communist regimes. Censorship ensured its short stage life. Now the next work, Diaboliad, 1924. A short satirical novella about a law-level bureaucrat named Korotkov who becomes a victim of systemic absurdity and a mistaken identity. The story is a critique of early Soviet bureaucracy where individuality is erased by dehumanizing systems. It's an early example of Bulgakov's Kafkaesque surrealism. Now the next work, Notes on the Cuff, written during 1922 and 23 and published posthumously in 1965. A collection of essays and sketches, these pieces show Bulgakov's early voice as an observer of Soviet life. They record the confusion, poverty, and the moral ambiguity of post-revolutionary Russia. Often ironic and incisive, they form a foundation for his later fiction. The next work, Morphine, written in 1927, published posthumously in 1984. A dark and a confessional short story based on Bulgakov's brief addiction to morphine. It follows a doctor who falls into addiction and despair while working in isolation. The story starkly examines psychological collapse and the numbing seduction of escape.